Something happened to you. Maybe it was 6 months ago. Maybe it was just last night. A message that ended something. A door that closed quietly. A person who walked out. A business that died. A phone call that cut your life into a before and an after. And on the outside, you handled it. You said the right things. You told everyone you were fine. But here is what nobody saw. 3 weeks later, you are sitting in your car in a parking lot with the engine off, and you are not going anywhere. You open your laptop at 9 in the morning. You stare at the same screen until 2 in the afternoon, and you have done nothing. You are not sad exactly. You are not crying. Something inside you just switched off, and you cannot find the switch to turn it back on. Then you look around at other people. You watch someone take a hit that looks worse than yours and stand back up in a week. And a very quiet, very ugly question starts forming in your head. What is wrong with my wiring? Why can they carry this and I can't? Most people call this weakness. They will tell you to stay positive. They will tell you to be strong. That time heals everything. That other people have it worse than you. And every one of those sentences will make you feel more broken than you already did because none of them tell you what to actually do. But the truth is, mentally strong people are not the ones who don't fall. Everyone falls. That shutdown you felt in the parking lot is not a character flaw, and it is not a choice. It is automatic. It happens in the brain of the toughest person you have ever met, exactly the same way it happened in yours. The difference between them and you is not toughness at all. The difference is one specific mental skill that almost nobody has ever told exists, which means most people spend their entire lives trying to fix the wrong thing. What happens inside a mind that does not break? Why that machinery is missing in most people, and how you build it on purpose, starting from where you are right now. I need to say one thing up front. Parts of this video are going to be uncomfortable. Like some of what you have been calling self-care is going to get named as something else. If you can sit with that discomfort until the end, you will walk away with something far more useful than comfort. Now, let's start with the science, because there is a story here that most people have never heard. In 1967, two psychologists named Martin Seligman and Stephen Mayer ran an experiment that became one of the most famous in the history of psychology. Animals were exposed to a stressor they could not escape from. Later, when escape became easy and obvious, they didn't even try. They just lay down and took it. Seligman and Meyer called it learned helplessness, and the conclusion spread everywhere. If life beats you enough times, you learn that nothing you do matters and that learning makes you passive. For 50 years, that was the accepted answer. Then, in 2016, in the journal Psychological Review, the same two men published a paper called Learned Helplessness at 50, and they said something researchers almost never say. We got it backwards. 50 years of neuroscience had shown them that giving up was never learned in the first place. Shutting down is the factory setting. When a mammal takes prolonged pain, it cannot escape. A small structure deep in the brainstem called the dorsal raphe nucleus floods the system with serotonin, and that flood actively suppresses the urge to escape. It is automatic, it is unlearned, it is standard equipment in every human being on this planet, including you. Here's the part that changes everything. The thing that has to be learned is not helplessness. The thing that has to be learned is control. There is a region behind your forehead, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, whose job is to detect whether you actually have any influence over what is happening to you. And when that region detects control, it reaches down and switches the shutdown off. Your brain does not come pre-installed with strength. It comes pre-installed with collapse. Strength is the software you have to install yourself. Think of it like the electrical panel in a house. When too much current hits the system, a breaker trips and cuts the power. That is not a defect. A house without that mechanism burns down. The trip is automatic and it is supposed to happen, but a breaker is not a fuse. A fuse dies once and has to be thrown away. A breaker is built to be flipped back on by hand. And the entire question of whether you have power tonight comes down to one thing. Do you know where the panel is? And do you know that your hand is what resets it? Most people go their whole lives sitting in the dark, waiting for the lights to come back by themselves. So why does that detector fail to develop in so many people? This is where it stops being about your brain and starts being about the world you live in. Your control detector learns the same way a muscle learns. It needs reps. It needs repeated experiences of you pushing against something difficult and watching the difficulty move. And modern life has quietly removed almost every opportunity to do that while multiplying the opposite. Look at what fills your day. The economy, the comments under a post, political news designed to keep you angry, a war on another continent, someone's opinion about your face, an algorithm deciding whether 3,000 strangers see your work. Every one of these is a genuine stressor, and you have exactly zero control over any of them. You absorb them for 4 hours a day. That is 4 hours a day of your brain receiving pain it cannot act on, which is the precise laboratory condition that produces shutdown. And at the same time, look at what you have removed. You don't cook, food arrives. You don't wait, it streams. You don't sit with boredom, you scroll. You don't have a difficult conversation, you leave it on red. You don't push through a hard workout, you skip it. Anything uncomfortable that you could actually control has been deleted from your life with a button. So your day is made of stress you cannot influence and comfort that requires no effort. There is no middle. There is nothing left in your week where you struggle against something and win. Your control detector has no training data. It has never seen evidence that your actions change outcomes, so it has never learned to switch off the shutdown. You are not weak. You were never given the reps. That is a completely different problem, and unlike weakness, it is fixable. But before we fix it, you need to see the 3 patterns that keep you in the dark, because most people don't just lack the training, they are actively doing things that make it worse. Trap 1. Protecting your peace. You have learned a beautiful vocabulary for avoidance. You are setting boundaries. You are protecting your energy. You are honoring where you are at right now. And sometimes, genuinely, you are. But be honest with yourself for 10 seconds. When you cancel the meeting because you're not in the right headspace, when you don't send the message because now isn't the time, when you quit the course in week 2 because it was affecting your mental health, when you avoid the conversation with your father for the 4th year running because you're not ready yet. Every one of those was a controllable difficulty. Every one of them was a rep. And every time you delete a controllable difficulty, you are not protecting anything. You are running a training session that teaches your brain one lesson. Hard things are things I move away from, not things I move. Here is the brutal part. Avoidance feels like relief in the moment, and relief feels like proof that you made the right call. So the trap rewards you every single time you fall into it. Meanwhile, the stress you cannot control, the news and the strangers and the noise, you leave completely switched on. You have it perfectly backwards. You are shielding yourself from the only stress that could make you stronger, and drowning in the only stress that guarantees you stay weak. The cost is that your world quietly shrinks. Every year, the list of things you can handle gets shorter, and you mistake that shrinking for peace. Trap 2, the fairness contract. This one hides inside intelligence, which is why smart people are the most vulnerable to it. Something unfair happens to you. You get passed over. You get betrayed by someone you were loyal to. And instead of moving, your mind opens a case file. You replay it. You build the argument. You rehearse what you should have said. You explain it to friends and watch them agree that you were right. You collect evidence that you did not deserve this, and you were right. That is what makes this trap so sticky. It genuinely was unfair. But notice what you are actually doing with your energy. You are not trying to change the situation. You're trying to win a verdict. You want reality to admit it made a mistake before you agree to move forward. And reality never shows up to court. Psychologically, the fairness contract does something specific. It puts the power to release you into someone else's hands because you have decided you cannot move until they acknowledge what they did. So the person who hurt you now controls the timeline of your recovery. You handed them the keys and called it standing up for yourself. The cost is months, sometimes years. Being right becomes more important to you than being free, and the two are almost never the same thing. Trap 3, fusing the hit to who you are. There is a difference between the business failed and I am a failure. There is a difference between she left and I am unlovable. There is a difference between I got rejected and I am the kind of person who gets rejected. The event is the same in both sentences, but in the first one, something happened to you. In the second one, something was revealed about you. When you fuse the event to your identity, recovery becomes impossible in a very mechanical way. Fixing a bad month is a project you can start on Monday. Fixing who you fundamentally are is not a project at all. It is a life sentence, and your brain quite reasonably does not attempt tasks it has classified as impossible. So it shuts down. That is not drama. That is the dorsal raphe doing exactly what it evolved to do when there is no available control. The cost is that every single setback becomes an existential event. A missed deadline becomes proof about your future. One bad date becomes evidence about your entire romantic life. You start carrying every hit you have ever taken into every new room you walk into, and you wonder why you feel so heavy. And This brings us to the real price of all three traps together. You spent years protecting yourself. You avoided the hard conversation. You left the difficult thing undone. You stayed home. You stayed safe. And the entire purpose of that protection was to make sure you never felt the pain of failing. But your ability to handle pain is not a fixed tank you were born with. It is built the same way everything else is built, by use. So, the exact thing you did to feel safe is the thing that removed your capacity to feel safe. You are more afraid at 30 than you were at 20. And it isn't because life got harder, it is because you got smaller. Protection cost you the thing protection was for. So, how do you actually get out? First, understand what we are not doing. We are not going to make you stop feeling the hit. You cannot decide not to trip the breaker any more than you can decide not to bleed when you're cut. That mechanism is older than your personality, and it does not take requests. Anyone selling you a mind that feels nothing is selling you a fantasy, and chasing it will just add shame on top of pain. The goal is much smaller and much more achievable. The goal is to shorten the distance between the hit and your first controlled action. That's it. That is the entire skill, not the absence of falling, but the speed of the reset. Here are 4 laws that build it. Law 1, find the smallest controllable lever. When your brain is scanning for control, it does not care about the size of what you control. It only cares that something responded to you. So after a hit, stop asking, why this happened to me? That question has no lever attached to it. Ask instead, what is the smallest thing in front of me right now that will move if I push it? Make the bed. Send 1 email, not 20. Wash the dishes in the sink. Walk to the end of the street and come back. It will feel insultingly small compared to the size of the problem. Do it anyway. You are not solving your life. You are feeding your prefrontal cortex a piece of evidence that your actions still change things. And that evidence is what flips the panel back on. Law 2, choose your stress instead of only receiving it. In 1981, the American telephone industry was deregulated, and Illinois Bell went through what was then the biggest corporate upheaval in history. A team of researchers led by Salvatore Madi had been studying roughly 400 of their managers for years before it happened, and kept following them for years afterwards. 2/3 of them fell apart. Health problems, divorces, collapsed performance, but 1/3, exposed to exactly the same disruption, came through it stronger than they went in. Madi found 3 attitudes separating them, and one of them was this. They treated difficulty as a challenge to engage with, rather than a threat to survive. You cannot build that attitude by reading about it. You build it by voluntarily inserting controllable hardship back into a life that has deleted it. Train when it's cold. Have the conversation this week instead of next year. Finish the course. Sit with boredom for 20 minutes without your phone. Cook the food. None of these matter individually. Together they are reps. You are manufacturing the training data your brain never got. Law 3, be flexible, not rigid. This is the law that contradicts the picture in your head, so pay attention to it. George Bonanno at Columbia spent decades tracking what actually happens to people after the worst events of their lives. Across 54 studies covering bereavement, injury, disaster, and combat, around 65% of people showed few or no lasting symptoms. Resilience is not rare. It is the majority outcome. But when he looked at what those people had in common, it was not emotional armor. It was flexibility. They could feel it fully when feeling it helped, and set it down when setting it down helped. They could ask for support on Tuesday and handle it alone on Thursday. They matched the response to the situation instead of having one setting. The rigid mind is not the strong one. A steel rod does not bend right up until the moment it snaps in half. Anyone who's decided they will never cry, never ask, never need anyone has not built strength. They have built a fuse, and fuses only work once. Law 4, build the thing the hit cannot touch. Maddie's second attitude was commitment. The people who came through Illinois Bell intact had something that they were involved in that the upheaval could not reach. Their work outside the company, their family, a standard for how they behaved regardless of circumstances. This matters because it changes the size of the hit. If your entire identity is your job, losing the job destroys the whole structure. If your job is one of 5 things you are, losing it takes out one wall in a building that still stands. So the question is not, what do I want? The question is, what do I have that stays standing when the thing I care about most is taken? Build that now while nothing is on fire. Nobody builds it during the emergency. Now, before you go and do this, you need to know what it costs because nobody warns you about this part and it catches people off guard. When you genuinely become hard to destabilize, some people will not experience it as admirable. They will experience it as cold. The friend who used to call you at midnight will find you calm instead of activated. And calm is not what they came for. Your family, who could always move you by raising their voice or going silent, will find that the handle they always used is no longer attached to anything. People do not usually say thank you when they lose leverage over you. They say you've changed. They say you've gotten hard. They say you don't care anymore. And there's a second cost that is quieter and hurts more. When you stop visibly falling apart, people stop checking on you. You become the one nobody worries about, the one who is always fine. You will find yourself carrying real things alone, not because nobody loves you, but because you got so good at the reset that nobody noticed the breaker ever tripped. That is the actual price of a mind that scares people, not enemies. Distance. Go in with your eyes open. But here's what happens on the other side of that price. Your capacity to be hurt does not disappear. You will still get blindsided. You will still have the parking lot night. You will still take hits that put you on the floor. What changes is the length of the stay. What used to take you 9 months takes 4 weeks. What used to take a month takes a day. And eventually something shifts in how you walk into rooms, because somewhere underneath your conscious thinking, your brain has finally accumulated enough evidence to believe a simple sentence. Whatever this is, I have come back from worse, and I know where the switch is. That is the whole thing. Not a mind that cannot be knocked down. A mind that has stopped being afraid of the floor because it has been there enough times to know the way back up. And this is not reserved for special people. Emmy Werner spent 40 years following 698 children born on the island of Kauai in 1955, the entire birth cohort. 201 of them grew up under serious risk, poverty, family instability, complications at birth. Everything predicted they would struggle. 1/3 of them became competent, caring, confident adults anyway. And when Werner looked for what saved them, she did not find genius or unusual talent. She found ordinary things. One adult who paid attention, something they were responsible for, a place where their effort visibly mattered. Viktor Frankl, writing after surviving the camps, argued that everything can be taken from a person except one thing: the freedom to choose their own response to what happens to them. He was not describing a superpower. He was describing the last piece of control available when everything else has been stripped away, and he insisted it was always still there. That is what all of this comes down to. Not being unbreakable, just refusing to sit in the dark waiting for someone else to come and flip the switch, when the switch has been under your hand the entire time. So, tell me, out of the 3 traps we went through, which one has been running your life? Protecting your peace, the fairness contract, or fusing the hit to who you are? Be honest in the comments, and you will find you are very far from the only person who picked yours. And if any of this landed, hit like and share it with someone you know who has been quiet lately. The person who says they're fine and clearly isn't. They probably don't need advice. They just need to hear that what happened to them was automatic and that the reset is learnable. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. Subscribe and turn on notifications so we can keep decoding the hidden machinery of the mind together. Goodbye, and see you next time.